Hey guys, this is Chris from Deus Ex Machina, and in this series we're going into the individual books of Affinity. We have another video that I just did called Paradise. This is one that we're going to talk about, Conestoga. Now, as mentioned, what we're going to see here is the monochrome version. We're trying to kickstart a color version and to increase the number of artwork in both versions. So this, what you're going to see here, has no artwork as of yet, and this is the monochrome version. So once again, hopefully we'll be able to expand on this heavily. Unlike Paradise, which has an 80-20 mix of magic technology, Conestoga is the opposite. It's 20% magic, 80% technology. We'll go through into details. Now, as I mentioned in the Paradise book, there's very little replicated between the three books. The first page here is duplicated. One monster is duplicated, but we also have proper names are duplicated. So when you see a name of something, that same name is going to pop up somewhere in the other books. Sometimes they're connected, sometimes they're representing something similar, and sometimes not. Part of that is just more for fun, for people to pick up on these, kind of like a scavenger hunt, and then see where these names are mentioned elsewhere. And once again, you look in the setting, there are some narrative connections as well. And this is, once again, more an artistic point. This did not in any way make writing these series any easier. It actually made them more difficult, because I had to make sure that these connections made thematic sense. So you'll see narrative segments in all three books, and they're quite large. And then we go into the Pacific element of the universe. Conestoga is a very unique thing. It's a very large alien spacecraft, thousands of miles across. It's about the size of the United States, if I remember correctly, and it is shaped like a giant peanut. The idea that there's every one of these settings, once again, this narrative connection, they're all three artificial worlds. One is a giant sphere, which with a model solar system inside. One is a giant peanut, which is Conestoga, and then the one's a giant donut, which is Taurus. Unlike the other ones, which are trying to simulate an actual real environment, the Conestoga is not. It's very much an alien vessel with strange architecture, and the only thing that looks normal are these geodesic domes that are on top of it that move. They literally slide across the surface. So we don't know if there's a front or a back of this vessel. It doesn't seem to have one. And these domes move across the surface, so players can suddenly find themselves encountering domes that they've never encountered before, with strange alien landscapes inside. Conestoga, unlike Paradise is meant to kind of be inspired by this political fantasy you see in stuff like Game of Thrones. Conestoga is very different. It's inspired by sci-fi looter shooter video games, and we'll see a lot of elements within that. So proctors are the kind of assumed role the players will be taking. That's thus the name of the adventures. They're mercenaries. They have the highest technology, and they go into dangerous situations to rescue people, to escort people, or to grab or to go on adventures. And much of the setting deals with the history of the known history. There's a lot of unknown history, and the current political climate, and where these proctors find themselves. First of all, once again, obviously you can tell, ignore these page numbers. These are obviously not accurate. We keep on adding new stuff, so I'm not going to bother renumbering these until everything's done. Like, we're on page 8 right now, and yet there's a 15 here, and I can skip to this chapter here, and it says 12, but it's actually page 17. So every book opens up with going through the details in the setting, usually the broad strokes. So this goes into the broad strokes of the setting and of the world. And we skip over to chapter 3, and now we're going into the specific things found within this setting. Unlike Paradise, Conestoga doesn't have as large a narrative segment. It's still quite large, but not as large as Paradise, because Paradise features a lot of political tension, which Conestoga doesn't have. But we will see, once again, as I mentioned in Paradise, a lot of replicated names, like Aquino and Ogati will be found in Paradise as well. And so this goes into the huge detail. We have a timeline as well. This is a pretty big section. And when I say it's smaller, it's not that much smaller. I think Paradise is 58 pages, and this is 50. Going on to Chapter 4, Origin, at page 54, we go into the races. We offer generally between 3 races, hopefully maybe more, within each book. We're offering a couple truly aliens, like there's an alien species called Nagomji, introduced in Paradise. We introduced a couple of aliens, Endolons, Scabs. Humans are here as well. They're being replicated here from 5th edition. I think that we did that just for the sake of this, and for sub-races where you can have a couple of other additional benefits. So we have another a flying race called the Scrim, and then we go into language and so forth. And we have a bunch of backgrounds to go through. Hopefully we'll add a few more. There's a whole bunch in here. And then we have a light path called psionics. And they have there's a big history on them. This is the element of magic. They're called Metrons. I want to expand this heavily. Right now it's only about 4 pages, so this is the magical section, and because there isn't much magic within this setting, but I want to go into more details on this magical idea. But the idea, there's not a magical class, it's a ladder, so you can still be a regular class and then have potentially magical abilities. We may expand this into a full class. We'll see how the Kickstarter goes. Now this is where things get crazy with Conestoga. This is Conestoga's big mechanical edition. I wanted to create a extremely detailed crafting system. There are 2 or 3 games that really inspired Conestoga's mechanical rules. I would say Destiny, but to be honest, it was Anthem, which is a game that unfortunately no longer really exists. I still actually play it. I prefer Anthem's fluff and gameplay more than Destiny, even though Destiny has endgame and Anthem doesn't have endgame. But I really, really enjoy the way that game just played. It was a fun game. I enjoyed it. It was buggy, but they fixed it. But the construction system was within the Conestoga is inspired by another game called Dead Space, specifically Dead Space 3. And I create that same engineering basic crafting system where you can basically make a bunch of different items. And we'll go into details on that. We go into into the various currency here, and how tech novels work. And crafting. Now, crafting is very, very important. We've actually given, a lot of times you're getting items instead of just full-on gear, and sometimes you're getting materials. So most of the time, an engineer, this is very much an engineer techie playground, and all players get a chance to do this. You can, if you have engineering, you can basically craft. It doesn't take as long as crafting magic items, where it takes months. It could just take a couple days and so forth. And when you find things, you're basically going to scavenge things, and these are all these resources. Now, in reality, obviously, you can't break down crafting into just 20 some items, but we're doing this for the sake of mechanics and gameplay. So we have basic materials, crafting objects, and then the machines that you must possess in order to craft certain objects. So as we go through these, through the gear chapters, and then we have power cores, and there's actually different power cores as well. So unlike something like Amethyst Ultra Modern, where there's bullets and then energy cells, and here there's actually there's no clips, but there's 6 different types or 5 different types of energy cell. But once we go into the gear chapter, you will see how complex this system really, really is. So this is one such gear page, and there's actually another one past it. So where before you would just see a bayonet plug or a tripod or something like a detonator or goggles, you'll see the cost and the weight, and if it takes an energy core, what core it takes, if it takes one at all. You'll also see a build time, see how long it takes to build it. And then here tells you the components, and this is something that people can try to build, right? So these obviously represent the symbology here. Well, so something like this takes this item and then takes widgets, and you'll see a little number above it that tells you how many widgets it takes. And obviously a more powerful item, like we see the landscape projector, requires 32 of this, 8 of this, 8 of this, 15 of this. This will be more clear in the final game. Let's move on. You have safes, muscle weave, and we actually have a bunch of these we'll skip. And we have miscellaneous gear once again. big section of gear, and then everything that's required to build it. If you think this is complicated, wait till we get to weapons. We'll skip past the descriptions, because there's a lot of descriptions of everything, and we'll move on to page 106, which is weapons. And the weapons are going to blow your mind, because this was a lot of work. Weapons are basically built. You have to build your weapons. There are few to no pre-made weapons. Everything has to be constructed. Thankfully, it's pretty straightforward. You have frames, and there are 3 types of frames. There's a heavy frame, there's a 2-handed frame, and a 1-handed frame. Each of these tells you how many drivers you can put in, how many attachments, and what's the indexes, right? And other attachments and so forth, build time, and once again, these are if you want to build the components. Sometimes you're not going to have to build, you'll just find a frame. For example, you'll find a legendary standard frame, for example. And so if you wanted to break it down to its components, you could, or you can build it a frame like that. So in your journeys, you may come across an item, or you may come across the components in order to make the item, which is something that's going to be an option. So the way the weapons work, you grab a frame, and that tells you generally how much damage it's going to be producing in comparison. Because obviously you have a 1-handed driver, 2-handed driver, heavy drivers, and these dictate weapon, the damage type. You'll notice, however, it does not dictate range. So these drivers are different types of ends. There's a blade, there's a couple blade, blast, elemental, a flechette, a fusion driver, ion driver, martial driver, tool driver, utility driver, and there's a bunch of these different levels. So there's a common and elite, so there's different rarities, and they do a bit more damage, and tells you the power core and the build time and so forth. And we go into the details on how that works. Indexes take the driver at that point and focus it into something a bit unique. So to really understand these, you have to read the instructions, but these do alter. So the accelerator index, accelerator, there's 3 levels of each of those: accelerator, alternator, compressor. So the idea being that if you were to take a flechette driver and attach an accelerator, it will operate as a different weapon than if you put a compressor on it, or if you put a repeater on it. Likewise, if you take a ion driver and add an accelerator index, it'll operate completely differently than the flechette driver to the same index. So like I said, when you have the graph, there's right then and there, you're talking hundreds of different combinations, which is kind of crazy to build all of that. And that still doesn't go into all the details, because, and this tells you the expressions. This is what happens. These are the different drivers. These are the types of indexes, and this tells you what those do. So you have something as similar as a flashlight, magnetic saw blade, sticky lightning, kinetic shotgun, javelin launcher, blowtorch, gravity manipulator. There's tons of expressions, and we go through how much damage they do depending on, and as you bring them up, it tells you the ranges, these in the description, the ranges that they give you, and tells you power and if there's going to be an alteration to damage, as well as unique properties as well. So there's, like I said, huge section. I mean, it goes all the way to page 122, and then the processors are additional things that can slightly modify the weapon. It doesn't affect its output, but can affect it. It can increase its damage, it can increase its range, it can increase its core capacity, it can increase your capacity of rolling a critical hit, it can give you free reloads or additional attacks, so through rate of fire. So there's tons of stuff that you can play with. And yeah, there's a very big section, and then we go into super heavy weapons. And unlike before, super heavy weapons are specific weapons, so you can still construct them, but you don't assemble them like the other varieties. And then we have upgrades, and upgrades are another thing. You can add a weapon lock. You can add acid application, something that adds flame to your weapon. Like I said, we're talking. The way I did the calculation, 11,000 different combinations of weapons you can build. It's kind of nuts. It was the most amount of work I've done. Switching to page 130, and we have armor. Armor is we have two types of power armor. We have crutches, which are kind of like your Elysium, just exoskeletons. But like before, you can construct them and you can slap parts onto them. Getting an endoslave, or a crutch for a character is pretty easy. You may even get them at first level, but they don't do very much at first level. And there's a variety of ones for different races. Humans have one, and we can see what they have, their armor class, their hardness, if they have a hardness, build time, and so forth. And there's obviously some very powerful ones, but the important thing you can do is modify them. And here are all the upgrades you can get for your armor. So getting an exoskeleton early on, pretty easy. But the point is that modifying it, and there are a lot of modifications you can give your powered armor, and we go into the details of how that work. And here's some energy shields you can get as well. So we hope to expand some of that, but that's a pretty big section. Because we've completely rebuilt how gear works, then we've also played around and redone how loot works, because this is emulating a looter shooter. Then we had to rebuild looter shooter rules. And finally concluding into monsters, and once again we have a bunch of new monsters. Unlike Paradise, most of these monsters are mechanical, they're robotic creatures. But a thing that I tried with Conestoga, which I might pull into the other two games depending on stretch goals, is I like the idea of offering variations, somewhat inspired once again by looter shooter games, having the same monster presented in 3 different challenge ratings, a common, an elite, and a legendary. And I think this is kind of neat. I think it's kind of neat. I think it's a neat idea. And I may play with it to give people that kind of variety, having common, elite, and legendary, and having their challenge rating move up accordingly. So there's a lot of monsters in this one. It goes all the way to page 207. Paradise is slightly longer at 210. This is a 207, but there's a couple of things I would like to add via stretch goals. So, and once again, like everything else, we end with a narrative segment. And like I mentioned, in Paradise, there is a creature known as Virus, which presents itself in every setting. Virus is different in here. It's Spout, Manifestation, and then Neofront. So these are 3 completely different virus monsters than you'll see in Paradise. And as mentioned before, there's a creature called Thinner, which is the only monster that's duplicated exactly. Although its setting is different, its history is different because it's embedded in this setting for a very bizarre narrative reason, but it's a very specific narrative reason. Its stats are identical. So that is Conestoga in a nutshell. Very mechanical rules, big crafting rules. If you want to emulate Destiny, Anthem, Dead Space, I grab all those settings and throw them together and create Conestoga. So if you like that, you want to play with that kind of looter shooter, you like the idea of engineering and building weapons and having to swap your weapons. You have one weapon, change a module, it becomes a completely different weapon, and you get to have fun with that type of idea. Give Conestoga a try. I think this one's, if you're a sci-fi guy, hard sci-fi, I think this is the one you really want to attach to. But I think all 3 of them offer something really cool and unique. So there you go. That's Conestoga. And check out the other 2 videos that focus on Paradise and Taurus. So that's it. This has been Chris from Deus Ex Machina.